You are listening to Fantha Tracks.
Fast ship. Never heard of the William Paul?
Never should I have.
It's a ship that made the Kessel run in less than 12 parsecs.
What a piece of junk.
Covering Star Wars vehicles in less than 12 parsecs, this is Start Your Engines.
Don't get technical with me.
Here are your hosts, Paul Naylor and Mark Newbold.
You're listening to Start Your Engines. I'm your co-host Mark Newbold, and joining me today from Fordingbridge, farthest from, is
Paul Naylor.
There you go. What an intro. What an intro. You can probably hear the noise of the event happening downstairs. Hopefully not too loud because we're trying to do a professional podcast. But we're here today. We're going to talk about the classic Sandcrawler and all its appearances as best as we can remember.
Yeah.
Going back to 1977, of course, we didn't see it really till 78 when it came out in the UK. But when that vehicle first turns up in, I'm going to say Star Wars. We didn't call it A New Hope when we were kids, but when that vehicle first turned up, you first see the Jawas and Tatooine and getting a view of the planet. What were your sort of thoughts as a kid on that vehicle?
The thing that sort of stuck with me on reflection was the size of it.
Yeah.
It didn't really appear to be that big a thing, did it? It just looked like maybe a double-decker bus kind of sort of size, a bit wider, but it's huge. It was one of the first parts of the movie that looked really beat up and used. The fact that the Jawas were driving around in something that was pretty slow, pretty sort of pedestrian, was juxtaposition to the way that they are as creatures scurrying around.
That's a good point, I suppose, when you look back at the film, because Lucas and all the people around it really worked on and made the used universe thing such a, you know, a key part of it, as opposed to like 2001, which was shiny edges and everything was polished. With a Star Destroyer, it's so big, there's no sense of scale. You can't really judge how large that is. Same with even with the Blockade Runner. But when you get to something like the Sandcrawler, it's in a location that, well, I mean, they filmed it in Death Valley or near Death Valley and out in Tunisia and places like that. So even a kid knows what the desert is or what a canyon is. You've got some sort of idea of that location, even though it's on an alien planet. But yeah, you're right. When you see that Sandcrawler, it is the first real time you see a beat-up vehicle trundling along.
And it was just such a strange looking thing as well, wasn't it? It sort of resembled a tank.
Or like a moving building almost.
Yeah. No, you're right. It did. It looked like a building that tumbled over and they were driving around in it. It was a bizarre idea.
So you see the Sandcrawler,
Yes.
you get a sense of its scale and size as much as you can, because obviously Jawas are obviously portrayed by children and little people in that
I'm talking
film.
about the first time you see it.
Yeah,
along.
there's
You don't
no
really get scale.
idea,
You get
is
the
there?
idea for scale later on, all the behind-the-scenes shots.
Yeah.
It's just basically the tread. That's all they made, but then the rest of it would have been sort of map paintings or remote control.
Remote control,
We'll
exactly.
come back onto remote control in a bit.
When you saw recently Light and Magic did that amazing documentary on Disney Plus, and they give you a little sense of how they made the version that you saw in the film, forced perspective, that amazing model that they built.
Yeah.
You do see extra sort of extensions to it in the special edition when they sort of work a bit more around the side of the Sandcrawler, which was fantastic. But as a kid, we got Jawas. You have, of course, told us your famous Vinyl Cape Jawa story.
We won't dwell on that.
We won't go back to that. But the vehicle, the Sandcrawler as a vehicle, as a toyetic, that's a great word, as a toyetic vehicle for kids to play with. Weirdly, you wouldn't imagine that little cloth-covered toys would be as interesting, weirdly, as they turn out to be.
No, it was one of those toys. I remember seeing it in the American imported Marvel comics.
Yeah.
I never saw one out in the wild. A friend of mine did have the Land of the Jawas playset, which was later repurposed as a Hoth playset.
That's right.
But the Land of the Jawas one came with the, and I was always more jealous of this than I was of the actual playset. It came with the escape pod for 3PO and R2, which was basically a cocktail shaker. So, but I was always more jealous of that than the actual playset. But I mean, it was a great little cardboard backdrop, very much akin to the Cantina one that they did. There was plenty of stuff knocking around, but I think I'm right in saying that over in the States, you could get the Sandcrawler. Certainly, you could get it as a remote control. Could you get it as a non-remote control vehicle, or was it always remote control?
As far as I know, I believe it was always just a remote control vehicle.
Because the Land Speeder, obviously, you could get both. And then the only other remote control thing I remember is remote control R2-D2.
Yeah.
That went backwards and forwards on 2 legs only.
Yes.
And made a rubbish
No
beeping noise.
232s.
Once I did know about the remote control Sandcrawler later in life, I'd still like one of those now.
Oh, yeah.
Manufacturer.
It was manufactured by Corellia Mining Corporation. It was a mobile refinery. So with the original trilogy, especially the original trilogy, you generally saw hover vehicles. Of course, it gets to Revenge of the Sith, and there's tanks that you see on Kashyyyk, which kind of harkens back in a way to the Sandcrawler, the logic of a ground vehicle. But generally in Star Wars, it was hovering, or it was mobile, or aerial, or deep space, or whatever. So for that, the Sandcrawler was quite unique, wasn't it?
Yeah. The fact that you could see the treads, that sort of gave it a little bit of real-world connection, I suppose.
But not too much.
Not too much.
Yeah.
It was one of the vehicles that you could understand how it worked.
Even as a kid.
Yeah, you could.
Totally.
Because we were surrounded by tanks and army stuff when we were kids in the 70s. So when you saw something on treads like that, it made you think of either your JCB that you got at home or your army stuff that you got, your action.
It was the nearest Star Wars thing to a Tonka toy, wasn't it?
It was, yeah.
I'm Anthony Daniels, and you are listening to Fantha Tracks. Well done.
50,000 credits if you want to buy one.
Oh, nice.
Which, strangely, you think of some of the prices of the flying vehicles, the space vehicles, the fighters and such.
Yeah.
That doesn't seem so much. I mean, you could repurpose a Sandcrawler, couldn't you?
That would be cool, wouldn't it? Let's see a repurposed one at some point in the future. That would be pretty cool.
That would be cool.
Technical specifications.
40 metres in length, 20 metres in height, and it can do a maximum speed of 30 kilometres an hour. So you don't really see it get at much of a pace.
No.
It feels like it trundles along at its own good pace. We see in The Mandalorian, obviously.
It seems a bit quicker in that, doesn't it?
It did. Quite significantly faster.
When he's battling away with the Jawas.
That's it. So it does seem to get a bit more pace in that one. But it does feel like these things sort of trundle along through the desert. Certain droids are repurposed, some are sold, some are probably scrapped. I mean, when you see in the hold in A New Hope, it looks like half of those droids are done for. Aren't they?
Yeah, it's spares and repairs, isn't it?
Yeah, literally that.
For everything in one location, daily news, reviews, interviews, podcasts, video and social media feeds, bookmark fanthatracks.com for Star Wars news 24/7, 365.
Crew complement.
Its crew, miners, engineers and vehicle technicians, a crew of 50 or 100 Jawas. So when that vehicle was originally used for presumably human crew, 50 people. For Jawas, obviously, don't have to worry quite so much about the bulkheads. 100.
You say that, though, because when we see in The Mandalorian, when we see the interior shots in The Mandalorian, he's clearly quite cramped in the driving area. That's the first time we get an idea of the actual controls of it. We do kind of get the perspective of the cockpit in A New Hope. Sorry, Star Wars. But it's definitely fleshed out more in The Mandalorian. And that's another great thing about the Sandcrawler. It has made quite a number of significant appearances other than the original Star Wars.
You don't see it in Return of the Jedi. You mentioned exterior appearances. There's a couple that jump to mind for me. I know which one you're going to talk about. The one that jumps out to me was from the Illustrated Star Wars Universe, the Kevin J. Anderson book, where Ralph McQuarrie paints the swap meet, which is a beautiful shot because the sort of the back doors are down. You see all the different levels of that Sandcrawler. And it was returned to, in a sense, in Attack of the Clones, when you see Anakin talking to the Jawas, trying to get a sort of sense of direction on where his mother's being held by the Tusken Raiders. For me, probably one of my favourite shots in the whole film, because it was just so McQuarrie, it was ridiculous. Yeah, you've got a very famous moment.
I've got two, so I love it in the complete Lego Star Wars game. But for me, in the Marvel Comics, Jawas of Doom, which gives an alternate perspective on Boba Fett escaping from the Sarlacc pit. I think he's got a bit of amnesia. He doesn't, and him and Han are sort of helping each other out, and then all of a sudden he remembers who Han is, and it all goes a bit pear-shaped. But the way that the Sandcrawler is involved in that comic strip, in which Mark is feverishly trying to find as we speak, you won't be able to show it to anybody. But it is a fantastic little sort of homage to the Sandcrawler. It was something at the time when I saw it, it did automatically take me back to the original Star Wars, and of course, it's a vehicle that's obviously very sort of dear to people's hearts because it's the last vehicle that we see in the sequel trilogy. When Rey goes to back to Tatooine and you see a Sandcrawler,
that's
the
very
Falcon
true.
Flies over.
That is that's a very good point. Yeah, Jawas of Doom, weirdly, I carry the old Dark Horse trades with me. And yes, that poor old Sarlacc
tumbling into a
ends up
Sarlacc,
swallowing that Sandcrawler, which when you look at the scale of the Sandcrawler and the size of the Sarlacc as we know it, probably doesn't seem quite so possible. But yeah, you're right. Having Boba Fett come back is just a magic moment. So it's always a cool thing. Passengers, 30 to 60 Jawas. Obviously, they don't need as much room and don't seem quite so hung up on having a Holiday Inn Travel Lodge quality lodgings.
I don't imagine they've got a lot of changes of outfit either.
Cargo capacity.
Can carry up to 1,500 droids.
Right.
Again, of course, they don't necessarily need the space either, especially if they're not active.
Yeah.
Poor old 3PO being from the world that he's from, it's a bit of a culture shock, isn't it?
It makes you think, because like the droid factory that was released, which basically is kit bashing droids from existing ones or building your own. I know. I seem to recall there was a guide that came with it where it showed you what droids you could put together. But you could make your own kind of things up. I'm wondering whether that was initially dreamt up as being part of the interior of a Sandcrawler.
Quite possibly. Transportation, shelter, it's got multiple purposes, but really, as we know, especially I think the Mandalorian has done a great job. Obviously, they're the off-world Jawas with the red eyes, not the yellow eyes.
Which it was a cool addition.
It was a great addition, and the grey hoods as opposed to the brown hoods. I love that. Like they do a tweak on the Tuscans in Book of Boba. I love all that sort of expanding the culture of these alien races, just that little bit. And they always said, I mean, going back to the Marvel books here, you know, they show Banthas being on other planets, that it's a creature that isn't just unique to Tatooine, which again was a great sort of addition, because you get Beast of Burden like that. Why wouldn't you take it off planet and use it in other places? And Jawas, you can imagine Jawas just sort of scurrying aboard somebody's spaceship in the ramp stand, because goodness knows in Mandalorian they leave the ramp stand and the ship's unlocked all the time, so it's more than possible.
They've probably got 30 or 40 of them sat on there with one of them big eggs, having a right good old time.
Nothing to do with Sandcrawlers, but what is it with the eggs? But basically the Sandcrawler, it's a fascinating vehicle. You do see plenty of it in A New Hope. Over the years, we've seen it appear in other avenues. We're at a vintage toy show today, so there are downstairs, there's all sorts of stuff. But I do know that Hot Wheels did their version of the Sandcrawler. Galoob did their little Micro Machine Sandcrawler. So there are other sort of Sandcrawler vehicles out there. And I will just mention one other place where you can actually see a very, very accurate looking and attractive Sandcrawler. It was originally built for one of the US celebrations. I can't remember which one it is, but I do know that a very beautiful Sandcrawler backdrop, maybe from Celebration Orlando 2017, now resides at Rancho Obi-Wan.
Oh, right.
So there is a very attractive one that was outside. I've not been there for a few years. I don't know whether it's still outside now.
I'm not sure whether you can still buy it from the Disney stores, but I think when we were over at Disney Springs, and I think you could buy a remote-controlled Sandcrawler from there. It's obviously a more modern one than the 70s one. But
last year at the Droid Builders UK event, somebody had built, and it's pretty much, I mean, near as damn it to scale to the Hasbro figures, version of a Sandcrawler that looked phenomenal and was going to be, I believe you were, it was going to be remote controlled and all tricked out, and it looked phenomenal. So it was a vehicle with scope for things to do for collectors. It'd be an interesting niche to get into as a collector. Ground vehicles, it's interesting. You see the tank on Wabani in Rogue One. There's not that many ground vehicles, so in that sense it is quite unique.
It's a block.
It's a block.
It's a block.
It is.
Hi, this is David W. Collins, voice actor for Star Wars and sound designer at Skywalker Sound. You are listening to Fantha Tracks.
The building in Singapore, the ILM building in Singapore, is known as the Sandcrawler. I was fortunate enough to go to Fan Days 4 in Fort Worth about 10, 11 years ago, and the convention centre that we were at was basically built like a Sandcrawler. So that's our look at the Sandcrawler. It's a fascinating vehicle. I hope we see more of it. Again, with Mando being out there now, the Mandoverse is expanding, and the option to see other worlds, but with unique touch points like the Jawas, like the Sandcrawler. I think there's plenty of value in that. Thanks for listening to Start Your Engines. If you want to be a part of the action and stay updated on all the latest Star Wars news, visit fanthatracks.com and be sure to comment, like and share on any of our social media feeds at Fanthatracks. You can reach out to us and send in your listeners' questions by emailing radio@fanthatracks.com. Subscribe, leave a review, preferably a 5-star one, on Amazon Music, Audible, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, or your podcatcher or smart speaker of choice. And as always, thanks to James Semple for composing the Fanthatracks intro, and our Start Your Engines opening music, Mark Daniel and Vanessa Marshall for our voiceovers, and of course the data miners at Wikipedia. Remember to tune in to Good Morning Tatooine. It's live Sunday evenings at 9 o'clock UK time, 4 PM Eastern and 1 PM Pacific on Facebook, YouTube and Twitch. And check out our Fantha Tracks Radio Friday Night Rotation. It's every Friday night at 7 o'clock UK time for new episodes of The Fantha from Down Under, Planet Leia, Desert Planet Discs, Start Your Engines, Collecting Tracks, Cannon Fodder, and special episodes of Making Tracks, and every Tuesday at 7 o'clock UK time for your weekly episode of Making Tracks.
Coming up next on Fantha Tracks Radio, it's Making Tracks.